9/11 poisoned America, and it did more damage to the culture and to the mindset of America. After this, everything changed. All the students were now looking at those people that were not from there as the others, as the enemy, as the people we need to go fight. There would be jokes like, gonna open a gas station or are you gonna blow us up? Where's your bomb today? I don't want to be on a flight with you. All these continued for years, and they died down over time, but they were replaced by a more dangerous thing, which was a latent racism, rather than an overt racism.
Could you explain what ADHD is?
ADHD is a brain disorder, and it is not understood exactly why this disorder occurs, but the way this disorder presents is the inability to not be able to regulate your thoughts.
What does it mean to you to be related to C.V. Raman?
More amazing thing to me is that C.V. Raman's nephew is Subrahmanyan Chandrasekhar, who defined the Chandrasekhar limit, which is the maximum density and radius of a black hole, of a white dwarf star before it collapses into a black hole. And he also won a Nobel Prize for studying light, but in space instead of in the atmosphere. So both of these Nobel Prize-winning scientists in my family spend all their time looking up and change the world because of it.
In this episode of the Billion Inside podcast, we talk to Vikram, a cybersecurity expert who was born and raised in America by Indian parents. Vikram shares his experiences growing up in America, including how the events of 9/11 affected him. He also discusses some very sensitive topics like ADHD and how it has impacted his life. He shares some of the challenges he has faced and how he has learned to manage them. Additionally, he talks about his connection to two Nobel Prize-winning scientists, C.V. Raman and Subrahmanyan Chandrasekhar, famous Indian scientists, and how he has combined Indian and American cultures in his life. This episode is going to be a little sensitive and one of the most profound and insightful ones yet. I'm excited about doing another podcast with Vikram in the future. So before we begin this, I would like to inform you that the Billion Inside podcast is now available on Spotify. You can now find us on YouTube as well as Spotify. If you have any suggestion for how I can improve as a podcaster, please let me know by commenting below or reaching out to us through social media. So without further ado, let's delve into Vikram's story and uncover how the events of 9/11 impacted the immigrant's life in America. Welcome, Vikram. Welcome to the Billion Inside podcast. How are you?
I am well. It's a pleasure to speak with you, as it's been every time that we've spoken and as it will be every time that we will speak.
So what was it like growing up in America?
So my parents have an interesting background. Unlike a lot of native Indians, which they're native Indians. My mother is from Tamil Nadu and my dad is from Kerala. Unlike a lot of Indians, they had the opportunity to travel in their youth and in their formative years. For example, my dad was sent to hostel in Indonesia. My my grandfather was actually a director of Philips. And as a result, they sent him to the Netherlands. And so for some time, my mother and her two brothers grew up in the Netherlands. And so they had already had international exposure before they came to the U.S. The U.S. was not the first foreign living that they had done, right? But they came to the U.S. in the 80s. My dad came to the University of Wisconsin-Madison for graduate school in industrial engineering. And my mom came and completed her master's degree in, I think it's referred to as like librarial studies. But by profession, she is a reference librarian. So my parents had excellent English to begin with and a very high level of education, and lived in the U.S. for several years, maybe 8 years before I was born. So they had some opportunity to establish themselves and save some money. And I was born in July of 1989 in a place called Farmington Hills, Michigan, which is about an hour away from Detroit. And this place I have fond memories of. I remember it being very green. I went to a Montessori school. So I had very interactive hands-on learning, and the student base was multicultural. So even the Middle Eastern kids would have, homemade Middle Eastern food packed for lunch. The Indian kids would have Indian food. The American kids would have, whatever their parents sent with them. But this was a multicultural and common educational space. And this is a young age. This is pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, first grade. So and even going into grade school in Michigan, which would be like 1994 to 98. I remember playing club basketball, like youth basketball. I remember eating at an Ethiopian restaurant called Blue Nile and sitting around there. They have a tradition of sitting on the floor and eating off of a thatched, raised like platform. And they have a plate that they put all the, kind of like a banana leaf, how you have, your various dishes spread around, and the banana leaf has maybe 6 or 7 different dishes presented on it to eat. It's a similar thing.
Banana leaf, it is very common here in India.
Yeah, that's why I used it as an analogy, because I also remember at wedding festivals and temples being served in this way. So the experience in Michigan seemed, given I was young, right? I was below the age of 4th grade. So the feeling was safe and comfortable. I remember playing street hockey in the street with my neighbors. The community was there, even locally. In 1998, my father got a job with Rockwell Automation, which is definitely Fortune 500 company that's headquartered in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And so we moved to the suburb of Menominee Falls in the county of Waukesha. And Waukesha neighbors Milwaukee County. And an interesting fact about Waukesha is in the United States, Waukesha is the most conservative county in the country by voter outcome. This place that we moved to, I went from kind of a safe and green and multicultural environment. We moved into school where I can count the diversity on one hand. There was in my class, in my grade, not even my class, across all the classes of my year, there were maybe 5 to 8 African American students, and there's a program where students that live in Milwaukee can choose to go to a school that is outside of Milwaukee rather than attend Milwaukee public schools. So there were about 5 to 8 African American students doing that. There was one Peruvian American. They had a mixed background. There were 2 Indians and 1 Native American. And the entire rest of the 300-person student population was white. Not only were they white, but they were white with parents that saw foreigners as others, right? Because of this conservative mindset.
Discrimination.
So they were raised kind of with this undertone. They weren't necessarily discriminatory, right? But they were raised with this undertone of, oh, that kid's weird. Oh, that food is weird. Well, what are you eating that looks different, that looks gross? So my mom changed my lunch so that it was sandwiches instead of like idli and dal. And one thing that happened, so this was in 4th grade that we moved to the U.S., to move to Wisconsin. Our 4th grade teacher actually rolled over with us, which is very uncommon. So he taught 4th grade, and when we all graduated to 5th grade, he became a 5th grade teacher and taught the same class. So I had the luxury of, in this unfamiliar environment, having that stability, having that person that I trusted, right, come with us. So it made it easier, right, because the class was cohesive, everybody knew each other, and the teacher was competent and engaged. He was a young guy, Mr. Rutch. He was the high school football coach as well. He always chewed gum. He was the only teacher in the school that allowed gum chewing because he wanted to be able to chew gum, so he let the students chew gum as well. So in 4th and 5th grade, 4th grade, I had appendicitis and I had to go for surgery. So when I came back, the teacher had gotten me a stuffed teddy bear, and the class welcomed me back with a card. So it was a nice surprise. And I kind of milked that because for the next couple weeks, so when we would play tag or when we would play Foursquare on the playground during recess, I would, if somebody got too close, I would pretend like my abdomen was hurting because I was sick. They wouldn't tag me. But I learned this quickly, and I started started doing it when I wasn't actually in pain, and I think eventually somebody just came and pushed me over
Oh,
after 4 weeks of doing this. So
okay.
um,
So you're pretending for pain for like 3-4 weeks, then it
so that I wouldn't get tagged.
yeah.
So this is 4th and 5th grade. At this point, you graduate from grade school, which is primary school in the U.S., to secondary school, which is middle school. And in Menominee Falls, middle school is only 6th and 7th grade. And then there's a junior high school, which is 8th and 9th grade. And then high school is 10th, 11th, 12th. So this is where my life shifts. So after graduating 5th grade, starting 6th grade, school started in August. And in September, I was sitting in class. We had each desk was movable, and each 2 desks was pushed against each other so that you were looking at your classmate from across the desk. And so the teacher could walk in between the students through the room. And one day, the teacher stopped teaching. And another teacher came into the room, and very quietly, they became increasingly, you could tell that they were agitated. They were not upset, but they were hiding something. And it was something serious.
9/11 event?
Yeah, and at that point, there was some whisper, some rumor, somebody had said, some of the students had found out and were passing around the knowledge that a plane had crashed in New York. This was after the second plane had hit, because the first plane, accident, okay. Second one, the country knew it was a terrorist attack, and so the news was spreading like wildfire. The students, being children, were not aware of the severity of the situation, and I remember somebody making the joke, and I thought it was funny, so I stole the joke, and I also made the joke, that the Pentagon has been hit by a plane. It is now the triangle, as the plane had caused it to lose 2 sides. So kids dealing with an event they're not cognizant of the severity of, which I don't think many people were. I think that only dawned on the country in the days following. It was kind of so let me say this. In some classrooms, I've heard some people's experience, and maybe for older students they did this. Because it was multimedia, global, important event, kind of like the Challenger disaster. The teachers brought in the TV on a big cart, big tube TV, and tuned it into the news so that the students could see the news event. And I'm glad that they didn't do this for our 6th grade class, because I think that it would have made it so much harder, I think, because we were not informed by the teachers as to the full magnitude of the event or the events that had occurred. It wasn't until, and my parents, I would wake up every morning and I'd come down, and 6:30 a.m. BBC America would be playing news, and then driving anywhere, radio was always tuned to National Public Radio. So my parents were very news savvy, and I was always immersed in global events. So when I came home, the news was on. And so I watched these events unfold. And as I saw it kind of again and again as they replayed it, and as the newscasters themselves became increasingly concerned and increasingly almost terrified,
Now you understand
I
the
could
gravity
tell,
of the event.
I could infer the gravity of the situation. And it scared me, as it would for, I think, any child. I think any Indian child would have been scared. I don't know if the American children had the same sense of fear, and I don't think that sense of fear was like racism or cultural. I can just only speak because it's not something that I've asked of my peers what happened when they went home on 9/11.
Why you thought that they would think differently, they would act differently in the situation?
Because rather than feeling scared, I think a lot of them felt angry. And those two emotions can overlap. And so one can become the other quite easily, right? And I think that because a lot of people took the view of they are attacking us. How dare they come here to our home and do this? And instead of, my view was, I don't remember exactly what my view was, so I won't speak to that. But I remember being very scared. And it was my father who took me into the living room and sat me down on we had a lovely silk carpet that my parents still have, but it was very soft, right? It had that textural silky feel. And so I remember the feeling of that carpet in this moment. And he calmed me down by saying, everything will be okay. You know, this is something awful has happened, but we are okay. Don't worry about this. Keep care of your friends and your family, and keep care of your neighbors. Let the rest of the world do what it will do, and don't be scared. It will be okay. And I remember that bringing me a lot of peace and comfort. And it's one of the strongest moments of parenting and fatherhood. It's one of the strongest moments that my dad as a man has gifted me in life. So after this, everything changed. All the students were now looking at those people that were not from there as the others, as the enemy, as the people we need to go fight. And because of this, I went through a lot of bullying. The only person who got bullied worse was the Native American student. And it's funny because, of course, the Native American is the furthest one away from the global terror scenario. But, I mean, realistically, conservative Americans have a history of beating down on the Native populace. So maybe it's some ingrained racism that presented itself there as well. But all kinds of things. There would be jokes like, "Are you or they're Indian?" You know, "Are you a Are you gonna open a gas station? Or are you gonna blow us up? Where's your bomb today? I don't want to be on a flight with you." All these continued for years, and they died down over time, but they were replaced by a more dangerous thing, which was a latent racism rather than an overt racism. And this latent racism, I think, is the thing that gave seed to the kind of immigration hate that we're seeing in the United States now. I think is because that racism was pushed down and inward. And because of that, it became okay to secretly have these racist thoughts. And then as time went on, it became okay to outwardly have these racist thoughts. And then more time went on, and it became okay to take action on these racist thoughts. So I think that really 9/11 poisoned America, and it did more damage to the culture and to the mindset of America, to the policies of governance and to the strategies of those in power. Everything shifted at once. And the result of that is the decline and the decline of the growth of good American values and the rise in the good old-fashioned racism. And so this was something that caused me a lot of... So at this time, through my childhood, my parents had put me through a program called Kuman. I think it's a Japanese program that is like a extracurricular math tutoring. And at this time, I was also an avid tennis player. And it would have been fourth grade that I went rock climbing for the first time, indoor rock climbing, as a part of Cub Scouts, which was another thing. I was involved in Cub Scouts, which is a community organization that promotes activity and skill building in youth. And so one of these things was indoor rock climbing. So I went with my dad for the first time, and I remember not being able to get up the wall, and him kind of being at the end of the rope, doing what's called a belay, which is managing the rope for safety. So if a fall occurs, the rope catches the fall. And he was, at one point, I think he got kind of tired of me not making any progress, but not giving up. And so he just kind of started slowly pulling me up until I got to the top. And that's my first experience of rock climbing that I remember, was finally making it to the top of that wall and realizing that it was my dad that had helped me. But even being a part of the community and being a part of these community events, I was an American. You know, I was friends with these people. And they could be friendly one moment, and then it would become lunchtime, and then it would flip, and it would become aggressive or passive aggressive or jokingly racist or overtly racist. And so it caused a lot of confusion and turmoil and uncertainty in within myself. Actually, if you give me 1 second, I need to refill my beverage.
Yeah, please.
So it occurred to me as I stood up, and my legs take extra stretching now, and I want to just revisit my life real quick. In the last year and a half, I was in an accident that damaged my spinal cord and paralyzed my legs. I could not control or I had no sensation, and I had no control of my toes, ankles, feet, or calves. And I was in the hospital for an extended period, and then I had 8 months of physical therapy before I could walk normally again. And it was as detrimental as the injury was itself. The more detrimental thing is, before that, I used to be a rock climbing instructor and a strength coach, a fitness instructor. And I was very fit. I was strong. And I've lost so much strength and I've gained so much weight that it's changed my life in a different way than even the injury could.
So,
it's taken away.
How was happened? I know about the accident.
Honestly, it was because of the drug use. The nitrous oxide, one of the things it does is it inhibits the ability of B12 to reinforce the insulation around nerves. So when you nick a wire, right? Your vacuum cleaner, you nick the wire. Now the electrical conductivity, the properties of that conductivity change, right? If you nick it down to one strand, that one strand gets very, very, very hot because of resistance, until it gets so hot it melts itself, and then you have a short, right? So if you think of the myelin insulator as that cable insulator, if you damage the insulation, the nerve can no longer send the signal properly. It goes from several hundred meters per second to a meter or two per second of conductivity. And the signal strength is not good. The signal strength gets lost along the way. So the B12 inhibition, because I was doing multiple units of nitrous oxide per day for many days in a row, it actually caused the insulation in my spine and my spinal cord to be damaged. And luckily, this was something, if you've heard of like multiple sclerosis, this is the same kind of injury with a different mechanism of injury. So it's that same kind of ascending paralysis, except unlike MS, by the grace of all that is great, I was able to reverse and recover that. But I'm not healthy now, I'm overweight, my legs are not as strong as they were, and I really need to focus on getting back to where I was. I've been there before. I got there, and I helped others get there. So I know I can do it, but I think that is the biggest challenge in my life right now.
When it was happened?
About a year ago now.
Oh, sorry for that, man.
Yeah, I mean, it was because of the decisions that I made, and those, the decisions. This was in between rehab. Okay, so I had gone through two rounds of rehab, and I'd relapsed, and the relapse was severe enough that it caused this injury. So I was already working on quitting at that point. I mean, it is what it is. Some people get hit by cars. Some people do too much nitrous oxide. And the funny thing is, I think I was happier in that recovery process because the acute effects gave me something to focus on. Being able to stand on one foot and balance on one foot for longer and longer and practicing that, is like painting a shed. You immediately see the benefits. You can slowly see the improvement, but you can see the improvement each time. So having that ability to focus on here and now kept my mind from going into dark or depressing places, where I think that when nothing is happening, then my mind kind of takes its own journey, and sometimes it gets stuck in potholes or valleys or caves. Speaking of caves, scuba diving in a cave is super dangerous, but it's one of the greatest beauties that I've ever experienced. And this, now I have ADHD and I have bipolar disorder, and while I went through rehab, I was also diagnosed with autism. which explains a lot in my life, actually, about communicating with people and social events and interactions with girls and women.
Could you explain what ADHD is for those who might not be familiar with it?
Sure. I'll do two things. I'll say what ADHD is, and I'll say how ADHD affects me.
Okay.
So ADHD is a brain disorder, and it is not understood exactly why this disorder occurs, but the way this disorder presents is the inability to not be able to regulate your thoughts. So the way this affects me is if I am reading, I cannot filter out the sound of the AC. If there's some bug that flies by, I cannot ignore it. If the person next to me coughs, I hear it. If the person next to me has a cold and keeps coughing, I can't unhear any of those coughs. All the coughs add up and start to irritate me. But what this also means,
by the events which is
easily
happening.
Distracted, and also my mind jumps around a lot. If you hear the unedited version of this podcast, I will be talking about one thing and then suddenly jump to a different topic. And this is a symptom of not being able to hold my focus and attention on the first topic. Right? The second topic comes to mind and immediately that becomes the focus. There also affects my time management. So I have a really hard time. I used to have a really hard time being on time for things and scheduling things and getting tasks done. A lot of people have that problem, but mine is such that it is crippling and debilitating. It's a disorder. The brain structure is formed wrong, right? So the brain doesn't work as it should. Thoughts are affected.
The symptom you just said, I can connect that most of us kind of suffering with the ADHD.
Right, and this is something that frustrates me because this is a normal part of thinking, especially if you're tired, especially if you haven't, eaten properly. All these things contribute to it. But mine is crippling. It's like saying, "Oh, I ran a mile. I ran 2 kilometers, and my feet hurt." And you're saying it to somebody who has had their feet amputated. Like it's a completely different level than the normal. It's constant. It's never ending. It gets worse given time. It gets worse. Like if you're tired and you can't think well. When I'm tired, plus my ADHD, I can't think at all. My thoughts don't stick. They jump around. I can't hold them. Sometimes and people have this experience. Again, it's completely different. I start in this room. I walk to the next room. I completely forget. It takes me 2-3 trips back and forth before I'm able to remember long enough why I'm going into that room. This is not normal. So ADHD there are different severities. I have a very severe ADHD. Some people just have,
Right.
The scale goes from you with a normal brain being slightly distracted to me with a dysfunctional brain being unable to hold thought. And there's everything in between. Now, the interesting thing about mental health disorders is that they're often comorbid, which means that more than one disease will present at once. And so I have a cluster of mental health diseases, which is autism, bipolar disorder, ADHD. So when you find somebody with ADHD, often you can confirm that diagnosis by seeing if they have other mental health disorders. But ADHD is often treated through the use of, generally, there will be medications that will act on the brain to either supplant a neurotransmitter. The medication will do the same job as a neurotransmitter that the brain would normally release but is not releasing properly. Or the medication will stop the neurotransmitter that's being released normally but in not a sufficient quantity from being depleted right away. So it'll cause it to stay around longer. And these two, for unknown reasons, help to allow for more focus and for better memory and better task recall. Mental health and psychiatry is a very complex thing. So I hope in the short summary that I've given that it gives some perspective to your viewers, to your listeners, and hopefully I explained it in an okay way.
Yeah, man.
And it's been really hard. Without the support of my parents, I'd be dead. I would have killed myself a long time ago. And it's only because, at times, it was only because I couldn't bear to do that to them. I know that it would devastate them and completely change their lives. And even in my weakest moments, I knew that that wasn't a fair thing to do to them. So they have kept me alive and supported me. They've been very, very supportive. A lot of Indian families tend to be very close, right, in the United States. But a lot of parents tend to be over involved in their child's lives, or very controlling. The kind of they call it like in Chinese culture, I think it's called like dragon mother, right? Very aggressive, very demanding. You know, you must be a doctor, you must be an engineer, you must be get your master's degree. And my parents never did that to me, and that contributed in me being able to find what I was truly passionate about and what would fulfill me, even through these times where I find lack of joy in life or a difficulty to find motivation to go to the next day. And I love them. They because of their parents, because of how hard my grandmother had to work, because her father, my great grandfather, kept getting imprisoned by the British because he was a freedom fighter. That left my grandmother's generation broken, right? It was a broken family because her father wasn't there. But yet she raised strong and successful children who in turn had the strength to guide their children, me, through these massive life difficulties that most people will never have to experience or see outside of hearing that, oh, somebody has, oh, you have ADHD, oh, you have autism, okay. Not really understanding how that affects the ability to live and succeed and find happiness. So if they had put any additional pressure on me, it would be very detrimental to me, I think. And it is because of the culture that they were raised and the Indian culture that supported them and brought them up and encouraged them to gain knowledge and gain success, that they felt comfortable supporting me and allowing me to do my own thing, but also did not reject me when I came back for help, even if it was sometimes simple help. And I'm very grateful for that. That's even now, like, my parents are helping me, and I have a plan that we've put together to really get myself on my feet now by myself and be able to maintain independent and successful life that has hobbies and friends and these passions and stable employment. But I'm not there yet, you know, and I'm 34 years old, and it's still going to take me a lot of work. So, you know, it hurts sometimes because I see the people around me. My best friend from childhood is the director of space operations for a Fortune 50 company. He sends data centers into space. We grew up building, like, fixing computers together. Like, these kids that had the same aptitude that I did and the same interests that I did, and that we worked together on the same projects and the same hobbies, you know, they've gone so far. And I've had so many struggles. So it's bittersweet. I mean, I don't know if I'd have done any better in India. I often think about that. If my parents didn't bring me here, would I have had any more or less time? Are the issues that I had inherent to me, or are they a side effect of the society in which I live?
No, man. Actually, what I'm thinking is whatever happened culturally post 9/11, that is contributed your ADHD and bipolar.
It certainly did. I know that traumatic effects can worsen the onset or worsen the presentation of mental health or cognitive, mental health issues. I shouldn't say cognitive. And so that certainly was a traumatic time for me. Like, there was a long time that I didn't remember between 5th grade and 8th grade. Like, my mind had blanked it out. So I feel bad for the people that can't get the mental health resources that I had access to. I feel bad that I don't have access to better mental health resources. It's a sad situation all around when it comes to supporting those that are ill in ways that we cannot see. I don't know how the biomechanics of mental illness, I don't think that the biomechanics of mental illness are well understood. I think they're still under study, under research. So I don't know if these traumatic events contributed to a severe bipolar disorder. or if the severe bipolar disorder was latent and would present itself regardless of the societal and peer events, right? Did the bullying cause the sickness, or would I have been ill anyway?
I believe that bullying has a long-lasting impact on life. ADHD and other mental disorders are just one result of bullying. So moving on. So you are into cybersecurity. How did you end up choosing this profession?
When I was, it would be 13 or 14, was when I was having a miserable experience at school. I was having a miserable experience mentally, and I was a teenager, so I was going through all the changes that also make you miserable. And so I retreated into the realm of the internet, which in 2003, 2004, even 2001, I had been using the internet for quite some time. I remember sitting on my dad's lap, logging into AOL when I lived in Michigan. And at one point, my dad gave me an old computer, which I installed The Sims on, and I used to play in my room. And I found file duplication functions. So I went through to make more space on my computer, and I found all the duplicate files, and then I deleted both copies of the duplicate files. So this was my first computer crisis. And my dad gave me the install disk and said, if you fix it, you can keep it. And so this is kind of how I started my computer journey, right? So when we had a home computer, it was in the basement, connected to the internet using dial-up. I would spend a lot of time on the internet. And I got to a lot of places on the internet that I probably shouldn't have. But one of these places was a hacking forum, computer security website, still up, still active. Go check out their Discord, hackthisSite.org. Awesome community. They have challenges and other tutorials to learn IT and how things work in technology backwards. Rather than learning how things are put together, you learn how to take things apart.
Reverse engineering.
And find holes. Exactly. And so through reverse engineering and self-learning, I taught myself some programming. I taught myself how to use Linux. I taught myself about web development. And there was a web poll on our school website front page. And it was a vote to see what the Friday hot meal special would be served by the cafeteria. And there were two options. I'm assuming one of them would have been pizza. The other one, maybe, I don't even remember. But there were two options. They were both pretty tasty. And I realized I could do what's called stuffing. And basically what I did was I downloaded a copy of the website, of the web page, and then I modified a web form so that the submit function, for every click of the submit button, rather than submitting one click, it would submit 1,000 clicks. So because there was no stuffing protection, which there are on basically every web form and every poll software nowadays, it was very easy for me to rig this poll to get the lunch item I wanted. And this was my first experience with computer hacking. And that made me feel powerful. That excited me. It interested me. It was amazing that I could simply destroy the integrity of the web poll with such a simple trick. And this is where I started my journey into cybersecurity, is because, and again, maybe it was motivated by some autistic tendencies that drove hyper-specific interests into technical and nonfiction learning, right? But this was where I started as a cybersecurity engineer. If I had not had that experience and I had not started learning then, I would not have made it to where I am now. So this was a great moment, even though it stemmed from a whole bunch of misery.
So how is like growing up in America? What activities did you typically engage in when you were young?
My dad was often busy traveling for work. He didn't want to go completely. So he would fly on Sunday night and then fly back on Thursday night and then spend 2 days with us and then go rinse and repeat, right? That was his work schedule. So he would go across the world sometimes and across the country usually doing his process engineering and lean deployments for manufacturing facilities. Meanwhile, my mom would pick me up from school and take me to work as she finished her shift at the library and before we would go home. So I grew up running through the aisles of the library and picking a book, ripping it out from its tight stack, and flipping it open and reading a page and stuffing it back in and then running down the aisle again and finding something else to read. I grew up in the library. I grew up around knowledge.
That's interesting.
I always was a reader of nonfiction. Even in my youth, I would rather read about geologic processes and how rocks are formed than I would about the secret world behind the closet, right? I got into the habit of learning independently. And I think that later on, this is what allowed me to really take charge of my education in my own free time and develop these skills for computers and computer repair, computer security.
How did your parents influence you? I mean, what value did they instill in you, which you still carry today?
This was another discussion that my dad brought me to the living room on the silk carpet for. His father taught him some core tenets, and those were respect, responsibility, and humility. Those are the three core, and then as life has gone on, my dad has tacked on additional ones, but those are the foundations on which he grew up on. And those were the foundations that were passed down to me. And then my mom is brilliantly intelligent. So being studious and being well prepared and being thoughtful and considerate to your neighbors, giving good gifts, thoughtful gifts, making sure that people feel at home when they're visiting. These kinds of things that are normal in India when you have visitors are not always the case in the US. But it was always something that my parents did, and it's something I try and do in my own way. But certainly that the tea of their wisdom has stained my soul.
How do you incorporate traditional Indian customs or practices into your modern American lifestyle?
So some features of Indian culture that have been co-opted by the West are yoga and meditation. And I find both of these to be incredibly valuable to the well-being. And as such, I try my best to practice them, particularly as a part of strength exercise. You can go to the gym and lift weights and all that, but if you meditate and then do yoga and then lift weights, you'll lift more weight. And that in turn will make you stronger faster, both mentally and physically. So these things are, I think, holistically something that maybe American culture has brought to me, but comes from India. The thing that comes to mind strongest, I think because it engages the senses, is the use of spice in cooking, the use of aromatics and of seeds and of powders and these flavorful and developmental additives that just turn a dish into an outstanding dish. Really influences how I cook and how I develop flavor in my food.
Being born and raised in the US as an Indian American, how do you see the relationship between your Indian identity and your American identity? Do you feel like you have two sides to your background, or have you merged them together?
I believe that I have one identity, and that is that of an American. And I have a cultural background and a heritage of being from India. I had the pleasure of my very thoughtful parents spending a great amount of effort making sure that we were able to visit India almost every other year when I was growing up, partially so we could see family, but partially so we could travel India and see my roots, see the culture from which we had come from, and meet the people and eat the food that has made India. And so I feel like a foreigner when I go to India, but I don't feel like I'm not at home. I feel more at home in the US. Whenever I go to India and I come back, the first thing I do is get myself a burrito. But I identify as an American, and part of that is because I had to. because of the bullying, because of the 9/11 events, because of all the evolution of the mindset of society in the country as those the effects of those events rippled through in their own way. I had to almost be, it's like somebody who gets bullied for being skinny, right? And then goes to the gym a whole bunch and overdoes it and becomes overly machismo and puts on this front of being a big tough guy. When he's not a big tough guy, but he's gone from one end to the other end so that he doesn't get bullied for being on the one end. So I feel like I am an American because I was forced to pick. And because I was here, and this is where I was born, this is, the cultural identity that I adopted. Because ultimately it isn't my cultural identity, but I go into, still in Waukesha, I can go into a room of white people. They'll all be Trump voters, all be conservatives. They'll all have lifted trucks and these other things that you think of when you think of rednecks or Republicans or however you call them. But they still look at me funny until I open my mouth and I sound white, right?
What was your experience like visiting India?
That's a great question. I was hoping you'd circle around to this kind of thing. So I love India, but India makes me very sad. This is because India is a beautiful place and rich in culture, but there have been two things that are devastating to India. One is British colonization, and one is pollution. And these things impact India throughout, from the tip of the sea to the mountains. The impact, the scar of those impacts is evident regardless of where you go in India, right? There is no natural preserve that you can go to where you won't see a candy wrapper.
Pollution part, yes, I also agree. It is like a cancer in our society, and the pollution is especially the north side of India. What pollution rating in Delhi is skyrocketing.
Yeah, at one time in the past, Delhi was the most polluted city.
Yeah, and it's one of the. Yeah.
It's trending towards that again. So I have seen more of India than most people in my situation, because I have had the opportunity to go out into basically nowhere, into these tiny, congregations of citizens.
Which part of India it was?
It was in South India, near Chennai.
Chennai.
But it gives me a bit more perspective, but it also does not make up for a lifetime spent in the country.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, in every day I discover something new about my country.
And I love that, because India has such a ancient history that there is something beautiful in every spot. Yeah. Whether you know or not, it is so long its history that every spot is significant in India. In the United States, the same thing is the case, but that history has been destroyed by colonization.
Yeah.
There are no longer native people to convey the beauty of the valley. There's only industrial facilities and buildings.
Yeah. The old civilizations, the Mayan civilizations, they're all gone. Nobody.
Yeah, no, not even that old. Not only that old. The United States history starts 250 years ago, because that's when Native American history ends.
Yeah.
That's another thing that just as sad as British colonization, man, the British the world. They destroyed so many cultures. So the idea that I have that always makes me even angrier than I am at the British is the fact that at some point, some monocled, mustached, comfortable, aristocratic British man took a map of Africa
and draw the line,
and took a ruler and just started drawing lines.
The square
and this rectangle. Dividing civilizations, dividing villages, dividing ancient spaces into these neat little boxes that could be easily controlled from afar. And it's part of the reason that Africa is so, I don't want to say this in a mean way, but like retarded in its growth, is because of this huge, massive geologic foreign influence. And like the British, the Dutch, the Belgian, all these cultures that generally exploited local resources for their home gain makes me very angry.
Yeah. If we talk about the old civilization, maybe it's a Mayan civilization, maybe Egyptian civilization, maybe a
Mesopotamia.
civilization. The one who built the civilization, those people are already gone.
Yeah, and the Indians are still there.
Yeah, the Indus Valley still here. We are cherish our civilization.
And that's what makes Hinduism so cool, is because it's so old, and realizations and the tenets of Hinduism, it's like they got it right so long ago.
Yeah.
That's one of the coolest things. Is like people are still trying to figure out things that Hinduism or the Indian culture has had, especially prior to the British influence, had nailed, had already figured out. Problems were already solved, are still being researched now.
Exactly. Are there any figures from both Indian and American history who inspire you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the great scientists and researchers of both countries are, I think, the greatest inspiration. Those who dedicated their lives to finding the answers to questions that maybe nobody asked except themselves, asking of themselves. I would need to go through and make a proper list of people that have truly inspired me or motivated me in the course of my education and of my life.
So what's your thoughts on Nobel laureate scientist C.V. Raman, considering you are descendant from him?
Of course, he's a huge influence, and like when I look at the scattering of light, and when I open the car and feel the heat that has come from the sun going through the gradient of the windshield, all these like little moments in life, I think back to the moments that he's written about of transiting the Mediterranean and seeing the jewel blue water and truly pondering the cause. I mean, that's definitely the scientist I think about the most.
So how you related to C.V. Raman?
So he is my great grand uncle, 2 generations up and 1 side of the family over.
So it is like your mother's side or your father's side?
It's on my mother's side. Maybe it explains why my grandfather and mother are so sharp.
So what does it mean to you to be related to C.V. Raman?
See, the thing is, every Indian that I talk to, that I happen to mention this little factoid to, immediately and completely knows who C.V. Raman is and what his accomplishments are.
Yeah.
This is something I only learned when I was in my 20s. And so I never knew about this familial connection, and I never knew about the greatness of his work. So I have come into situations where, because of the accomplishments of those that are related to me, people ascribe some value or accomplishment to me myself. And I think that's an easy mistake to make sometimes, but it's an important mistake to avoid, because one cannot be blamed for the mistakes of their ancestors, right? You cannot punish a baby for the crimes of the father. But there tends to be this greater than human like sense that I get when I talk to some people about C.V. Raman. And interesting that the Indian culture holds him so highly that this happens, you know? Because like if you look at the United States, I'm going to use a US sports metaphor. If you look at LeBron James, one of the greatest basketball players of all time, and a great member of the community, contributes, you know, to schools and to youth programs and to the ability of people that can't play basketball to be able to play basketball. If you are LeBron James's brother, are you automatically as kind or as important or as skilled, or, you know, do you have the same attributes?
Not necessarily.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You may have different path in life. You may have different cognitive abilities. You may have different physical stature or skill.
Yeah.
But people will become blind and say, "Oh, wow, you're LeBron James's brother? That's so cool. You're so cool." And I don't know what that effect is called, but I'm sure it's been defined by somebody. C.V. Raman, the more amazing thing to me, okay, is that C.V. Raman's nephew is Subrahmanyan Chandrasekhar, who defined the Chandrasekhar limit, which is the maximum density and radius of a black hole, of a white dwarf star before it collapses into a black hole. And he also won a Nobel Prize for studying light, but in space instead of in the atmosphere. So both of these Nobel Prize-winning scientists in my family spent all their time looking up and changed the world because of it. So when I look at the stars and I look at the moon, and I had the absolute pleasure of seeing a solar eclipse recently.
You saw the eclipse?
I saw a partial eclipse.
Okay.
I wasn't able to travel. I was hoping to travel into the path of totality, but seeing a partial eclipse, it's still the only eclipse across the United States until 2044. So it may be a once in a lifetime event.
Yeah.
And to honor my ancestors' habit of looking up, I had to go see it. I made it a point to go see it. And it brought tears to my eyes to see these celestial objects, and just a blink in the timeline of the cosmos, just an absolute fraction of a second of alignment in the context of the timeline of existence is just, it was great to see. It was the scientists in my family definitely stood forward in my mind as I observed that glorious event.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have, for fun, I have a laser. I know you've seen the laser. It's
Yeah.
a 2.5 watt programmable show laser. Sometimes DJs use it, but it can be used for other things. Every time I fog up my room and put some particulate into the air, and the laser beam passing past these molecules suspended in the air, and then the diffraction of light that results in my ability to see the beam. This is C.V. Raman's glorious discovery. This is the defining study. So every time I play with this laser, I thank C.V. Raman. I understand why it is what I see.
What are some stereotypes about Indian American community that you like to address?
I think that a common stereotype is that the one that I get online, this latent racism that's easier online than it is in person, right? Is that all Indians are part of scam call centers. And I think that the prevalence of those kinds of, the fact that a lot of Americans' only interactions with Indians have been through spam calls has contributed to this idea in people's heads that India is one big scam call center. And I think that, especially online, people just assume that, oh, you have technology, you must be a scammer. So that would be one that's, I think, more detrimental, because that can preclude the ability to build a relationship. Whereas if somebody thinks you're smart and you're not so smart, that expectation will be worn down as time goes on. Somebody thinks you're a scammer and you say I'm not a scammer, they're gonna still think you're a scammer.
Yeah. And talking about the scammer, I remember one news which came out recently. It is many Indians. You know that the employment is the biggest problem here in India nowadays. Most of the people are now unemployed. So they often get a text from Telegram or WhatsApp that you have a job, would you like to take it, or something like that. So many Indians, when they got the text,
They don't
opted for
realize
it,
it's not a real job.
but they opted for it. A country called Cambodia.
Yeah, of course.
So
It's next to Laos.
Yeah, it's next to Laos. There is a gang in Cambodia. They texted the many Indians. So to come to Cambodia and do a job, you will get a great job and all. So somehow convinced them to come to the Cambodia. So those Indians who went to the Cambodia, do you know what they did to them? They made them all slave, and they forced them to scam fellow Indians.
So they scammed the scammers into scamming.
It's not the scammer.
They became scammers. They didn't want to be scammers, but they became scammers.
They became scammers. Yeah.
Not by will, but by force. But and that's amazing that the economics of this black market industry have developed to the point where operating your scam call center in India is no longer the most profitable option. That's an amazing thing to me.
That is the funniest and yet is the scariest thing.
See, the thing is, you need somebody that's educated enough to be able to educated and smart enough to be able to A, read, and B, talk to people, and C, know English. But you also need people that are not well off enough to be desperate for opportunity. And that's an intersection that I think comes from India's explosive growth. You don't necessarily see the same kind of thing in other parts of the world, right? It's not unique to India, but India is prevalent for it.
Most of the Indians, especially the elders, they are not tech savvy. Unlike Americans, because older generation, they know also how to use the tech and all. Still, they kind of easily scammed by the Indian scammer.
Yeah, I always, not always, it's crossed my mind before that if I were to go to India and get a job at a scam call center, if I would get paid more because I sound white.
Yeah. So according to you, which is the biggest challenge facing US today?
Politics. There's a huge amount of division, and people, because of the internet, they're able to stay in their little bubble, and it makes them angry, and then they don't want to talk to the other side. And that needs to be reconciled in a way that is not civil war.
So who you personally want to see the next president of US?
I don't want to see either of them as president. I think that we are in an unfortunate situation where we're stuck with shit with corn in it or shit with rocks in it. So I think personally I will vote because I need to vote for local and state elections because that is where my vote will make a difference. And then if I have to participate in the team sport, the two-party team sport of American politics, then that's an unfortunate side effect. But, you know, if it needs to be done, it needs to be done.
So, Vikram, what's the best
Yes,
piece
sir.
of advice you ever received?
There are two. One is simple, common, not so simple. Live in the moment. There's no time like the present, as they say. And lingering on the past or betting on the future is not as powerful as acting now. And sometimes that's easier said than done, but it is the best advice. The second, maybe I'll do three. Second is be kind to yourself. It's easy to beat yourself up, especially for mistakes and for errors, unforced errors where you just blunder. These kinds of things can cause a lot of mental angst and perturbation. And I think that it is important to take time to give yourself the luxury of making mistakes safely and also to practice self-care and allow yourself to heal both mentally and spiritually. And the third one, I've forgotten the original one, so I'm just going to go with keep it simple, stupid. You know, it's oftentimes things are easier than we think. And, you know, it's easy to overthink. It's part of the human condition, I think, to keep thinking and to keep analyzing and to look for solutions. Maybe not for everyone, but start with the simple solution. And if you find yourself needing to compound that solution to make it effective, then do it. Don't start with some complex engineering right away.
Yeah.
At the same time, regularly look backwards at what you've created and what you're working on, and make sure that you haven't created an engine that is too complex. And see if there are parts that can be simplified or abstracted or reduced. And it will make life and your projects much easier to handle.
Yeah, that is interesting. So yeah, that's the end of the podcast. Any final thought? Did you enjoy
I'm
the
glad
podcast?
that you are doing this little project. This is, I think, valuable that you are searching for the content that you are. And I think that you've asked thoughtful questions that hopefully will keep people interested and engaged. Hopefully I haven't given you too much audio to edit, but it's been a joy to speak with you. I'm happy to do this again anytime. And even on top of that, I look forward to just being able to hang out with you.
Yeah, man, I really hope so. I just started out. I don't know where it goes and all. It is currently an experiment. For the long time, I wanted to do something in YouTube and Spotify, but I couldn't. But this year, I just decided, screw it, I will do it.
Do it.
Yeah. So
Good for you. Sometimes all it takes is that spark that starts the fire, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes the fire burns out early, and sometimes you start the entire forest on fire.
Yeah, man.
Hopefully you achieve a nice balance where you have steady growth from people that are organically finding the topics that they are interested in your podcast. So
yeah. Thanks, man. So, man, before we wrap up, could you kindly ask our viewers to subscribe to the Billion Insight channel? Yeah.
When you subscribe to the Billion Insights channel, your life will be immeasurably improved. Click now.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. So, Vikram, thank you so much for talking with us today and sharing your experiences. We wish you all the best for your future, and I hope to have you on another podcast sometime.
And I wish you even better.
Thank you. And to our listener, thank you for tuning into the Billion Insight podcast. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes. And until next time, dream big and work hard. This is Sri signing out.
Listen to this guy. He's a sharp cookie.
Peace.